As we wait for people to come in, we'll just say hello and welcome to this edition of Heart to Heart, one of the ECIS collaborative conversations with WomenEd. I'm Kyra of WomenEd Spain, joined today by our panelists and by Angeline of WomenEd Germany. We'll just wait for you to filter in and we'll get going in a moment. Thank you for joining us.
So great to see familiar names in our attendees. And if you'd like to just share with us, who you are and where you're joining us from in the chat, that would be great. And make sure you kind of click on all panelists and attendees though. So Zoom's done a little change there. So yeah, so. Yeah. Hi, Casey. Good to see you there in Bonn. I owe you an email. Hi, Deborah. Hi, Deborah. Good to see you too, Emily and Cam. Pauline.
Hi there, Pauline.
Thanks for joining us.
I'm really, really excited about this edition, I have to say. And I'm sure that our timing means that we're going to lose a lot of people to lunch. But if you know someone who would enjoy it, of course, we're going to share on the WomenEd Twitter feed and also on our YouTube channel once we are done, so that you can share the words of wisdom that we're going to hear today. Hi there, Deborah. Nice to see you. So we've got Germany, Netherlands, Italy, Spain, Hong Kong, UK in the room.
I'm just going to share my screen and hope this runs smoothly.
So today one of our panelists is in Pacific time, and so we asked him to pre-record because it's about 3 in the morning for him. So we will be attempting to show his responses in video form embedded in our presentation, and we've done a run through, it worked. Hopefully it continues to work and you can hear what Corey has to say, because he has some really awesome things to add to the conversation. So yeah, shall we get going, Angeline?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we always kind of begin with just sharing a little bit for some of you who may not be familiar with what WomenEd is. So it's a grassroots organization that started by a bunch of women who had a Twitter hashtag, and they realized that there were a lot of the similar issues that they were interested in, and then they got together in a restaurant in London, and then started organizing events. So evenings where people could get together, that turned into conferences, and then it just grew into multiple regional networks across the UK. And as it spread beyond the UK, we have WomenEd groups here in Germany and with Kyra in Spain and beyond. And so really it's a nonprofit organized thing where we're supporting aspiring and existing women in education in order to help narrow the gender gap that exists.
So just a few housekeeping notes here from us. We're in a webinar format, obviously, so we are not able to see you, but we do want to hear from you. So please make this as interactive as possible. You can select reply to panelists and attendees when you're using the chat function. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout and making sure that we integrate your comments, your questions, so that we can get them asked live. We won't be using Q&A, but as we said, the session will be recorded. So if you have a question or you know somebody else did, you can post that into the chat, ask it for them, and then the recording will be uploaded afterwards onto the ECIS website and also onto the WomenEd social media channels. We've got our Twitter handles there as well. Corey is at Imagine Scholar. We have Sean Lynch at CIS, Malcolm Richards, and then Ange and I are there in case you think of anything that you wanted to ask us afterwards. So please do get in touch on Twitter. Let's do intros. Okay, so our first panelist who is joining us remotely via video recording link, I should say, because he's not awake at the moment, is Corey Johnson. Corey Johnson is the executive director and founder of Imagine Scholar, which is a South African community-based organization. So it's essentially an enrichment program that works with local scholars from grades 8 through 12. I came across Corey and met him when I interviewed him for my podcast. He He is a completely amazing person. He was described to me and recommended as a guest as somebody who was a unicorn. And I think I can back that up when you hear him speak about what he does. He's so passionate. He says his greatest passion is creating a world where good kids who work hard and do the right thing have great lives. And that just sums up Corey. It's simple, it's accurate, and it's full of warmth and feeling. So I can't recommend that you check out Imagine Scholars website enough and have a look at what they do. And it will become clear when you see Corey's recordings just how he works and how he is upholding the values that we're striving to talk about today. You can also follow him on @Imagine Scholar on Twitter. So that's Corey. Welcome to Corey in Absentia.
And today we also have Sean Lynch with us. He's the head of the Chinese International School in Hong Kong. And prior to that, he was also the head of school in New York, another bilingual school. And so he's also had a long career as an educational leader in Paris, and all of the schools have bilingual education. So he's used with working with populations that are multinational and multilingual. He's also a very accomplished educator, so we're very lucky to have him here with us today. He's a Klingenstein Fellow of Columbia University Teachers College and the recipient of the Palme Académique from France. My French is horrible, so excuse my pronunciation. And I had to look up the award as well, and it's something that's bestowed by the French Republic on distinguished academics and teachers. So congratulations, Sean, on this great achievement. And recently, Sean shared with us that he's also become a qualified administrator of the IDI and Intercultural Development Inventory. And so that's good to have you with us today, Sean. And we also have with us today Malcolm Richards. And Malcolm's a researcher and PhD student at the Graduate School of Education at the University of Exeter. He's also got a great depth of experience in education, having been a former teacher and also senior leader, and he's advised across England and Wales in schools. He's also the co-owner of a new shop, I think, called Book Bag. So good to promote that. Make sure if you're in the area to purchase from Book Bag, and he's also worked a lot with different youths and published about masculinity, for example, in boys in schools. And so welcome, Malcolm. I'd like to hand this over now to Cara to talk a little bit about, just to set the stage for what our challenges are.
Yes, and I'm going to do this very, very quickly. I'm horrible with data, but I think the reason that we wanted to include these slides, and these are a little bit older than the ones Angeline will show you, is just to set the scene about why these conversations are important and why they're needed. So this data comes from the 2018 Council of International Schools Head of School Survey, which had more male respondents than women. So female respondents were only 26% of the group. But the data showed that male heads of school were paid significantly more, almost a quarter more than their female counterparts. We have a couple of issues. One is that women are not responding as well, that they are not represented as widely, and also things that come into the mix, such as men being 4 times as likely to negotiate a starting salary or to negotiate a pay offer in a new job, are some of the reasons that we thought it was really important to have this conversation today with some of these leading male allies that we have working in education, so that we can start to unpick some of the things that maybe women can do to make sure that we reach parity, but also what things are preventing men in giving some of that space to their female counterparts. And it could just be that we are not, standing up and being heard in things like these surveys, which is a super, super important start for us to make. If we skip forward to the next slide, we can see the disparity in pay. So net salaries were measured in the same, in a more recent survey, so in the 2020 CIS survey. And so what this data showed us, this was presented to us by Nana Naomi in one of our heart-to-hearts a couple of months ago. There was still a pay disparity. 131,000 was the average salary net for male heads of school and 116,000 for females. And again, school respondents were overwhelmingly more male respondents in this salary survey as well. So what we're seeing is that we need to encourage female leaders to speak up. We also need to get into the habit of asking for more, and we need to get into the habit for negotiating what we want. And so there are some tips that we can gain, certainly from listening to our male counterparts, but also to understand how to embed those practices with other male colleagues in schools as well, so that the understanding is there across the board. Over to you, Angeline.
And so I was thinking about then, well, when will this gap actually narrow? And so I went and had a little bit of a dive into the data, and I came across this 2018 Global Gender Gap Report from the World Economic Forum, and it's pretty shocking that think that the world average for this economic gap to narrow, it's going to take 108 years on average. And so, like, when you think about that, even though the statistics with just the CIS survey shows that there is the gap is narrowing, but it's not as easy as saying that okay, because it's narrowing, maybe it'll take 10 years if it's narrowing 5% every year, because that's an assumption that the male salary or whatever is not going to also keep increasing, right? So the disparity is definitely there, and it's not only economic. So what we've also seen with the pandemic is that the UN Women Report on Gender Equality in the wake of COVID has shown that there is also, the pandemic's also intensified women's unpaid care and domestic workloads. And so the gap is not just economic, but they wrote in the report that the impact of crisis are never gender neutral. And COVID-19 is no exception. And so for many women, the pandemic has increased what we call time poverty. And so you can see here that they shared that men are much more likely to say they don't engage in these activities than women. And so 44% of men reported that was the same. Yeah, so thinking of that, those kind of stark statistics, and I'm sure that you could probably ask women in education, and they'll say, you don't need the statistic to tell me what I already know. and so, but I wanted to begin also and turn it over to our guests in a moment with a question. But in the WomenEd's most recent book, Being 10% Braver, there is a chapter in there titled "Stand by All Women." And in this chapter, Malcolm contributed to this chapter, and the title of the chapter was actually "But You Are a Man." And in the chapter, he shares an anecdote with us about writing about supporting women leaders. And while he was doing this, his family was questioning him and saying, "Yeah, but you are a man. Why have they asked you to write about this?" And it was actually your wife, Malcolm, who said, "You aren't always a good ally when it comes to helping at home." I quote that from the chapter, and so I'm grateful for your bravery in sharing this story, and want to ask you a question you close with in that chapter, which you asked yourself, like, am I a good ally to women leaders? So how would you answer that today?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank everybody, and I hope everybody is well, safe, and okay. And I give thanks for that. In answer to your wonderful question, it's always difficult when you are, I guess I'm going to use your words, brave, in terms of putting your own truth out in the street, i.e. in press and in print. What would my answer be? My answer would be probably the same as it was then, which is I'm the wrong person to ask, in all honesty. I'm not sure that I'm the best person to evaluate my own performance, if we're going to use that kind of language, in terms of being an ally. I think the only people that can be asked are those who work with me, and in particular the women who work with me. If they say it, I'm going to believe it. If they don't say it, or if they say it to somebody else, I might believe it. But otherwise, I'm probably, not the best person to truly and critically evaluate my allyship as exposed by my family in the piece.
Just as a follow-up then, Malcolm, like how would you then recognize, say, a he for she ally in another person? What do you look for?
Yeah, I'm going to start with openness. I think is probably the best phrase that I would. And if I think about my educational career across different contexts, mainly in the UK, even if I reflect on being a student many years ago, through to my time as a teacher and senior leader, and then an advisor, and now in higher education institutions, I look at those who are open, and when I say open to criticism, open to reflection, open to advice, and that openness also transfers to their reflectiveness in their work, the way in which you kind of go about things. And so especially in these times, when engaged in tricky ground, I like to call it hot sauce, discourses and discussions which are problematic for some, unsettling for others, especially when we're talking about race, identity, cultures, allyship. It is important for us all to be open to the other discussions, other points of view. When it comes to your own practice or praxis in particular, being open to somebody saying, being open to your children saying, you're not an ally. You're not being an ally in this situation is really, really hard to take. The key thing is then kind of what do you do with that, and where do you move on or move towards in terms of that work as well.
I think I'm going to steal that, the hot sauce conversations.
As long as you put
I credit you. Copyright Malcolm Richards. There's comments coming in the chat already about your humility. Humility and openness seem to be two massive factors, and I think that what you've started with there is a great basis for us talking about how to just set aside space and time to be self-critical, to be analytical, and to look at our own behaviors and judgments and bias that we all have. So thank you for that. Yeah, there's definitely some resonance in the chat there.
How about you, Sean? How would you recognize a he for she ally?
Oh, first of all, let me thank you as well for inviting me today to join you in this conversation, which is so important. And I would say exactly what Malcolm did. Honestly, I feel that the only person who can, or the only people who can possibly attest to whether or not I am actually a he for she ally are the women with whom I work. And the young women, I would say, who are in my school as well. I think that's really important to note. I guess I would also put forward that maybe there is, I guess, maybe knowledge is not the right word, but perhaps an understanding that is really important, that comes through in the openness and the self-reflection that Malcolm talked about. And I think it also comes through in the actions that a person takes who is a man. And in my case, I speak fully of the privileges that I have as a white man, of the not just the disadvantages that women may face in the workplace, or young women may face as they come through the schooling systems that we all have, but also the privileges that are men's, and that need to be well, as I said, understood, but also ultimately tackled and dismantled and shared. And I think that's probably something that, I don't know, I say this to everyone around the table, that might indicate someone who is a he for she ally.
Yeah, thank you. I think what you were saying about understanding and recognizing your privileges and turning that into the actions one can make is also kind of why I I selected this picture about why we don't need no patriarchal education. We could also add patriarchal, maybe colonial, so there's a lot of that conversation that's happening right now too, that just recognizing that these are the foundations that we've kind of that have grown international education across the globe, that wasn't as explicitly recognized before. The last year of global reflection that has happened. And I think that that's, yeah, so thank you for touching on that. I'd also like to just play a quick video from Corey in response to the same question that we asked him as well.
So the next question is, how would you define a he for she ally? For me, this starts at somebody who's done the hard work of actually looking at themselves, who's checked a little bit into their privilege and realized, you know, and I think that's a place of a lot of insecurity. So much of our ego and our validation is about where we've gone in life. And when somebody has to be told that, you know, maybe they got a little bit of a cleaner path or a little bit of an easier way to get somewhere, it can be really hard to check yourself. So I think it starts with having that deep look inside. And then I think it's just somebody who's actually done something. You know, I'm confident if you give a survey to someone, you know, people will identify as an ally or that they care about it. But if you ask a deeper question and say, well, what have you done? I think that really is the difference, is, you know, somebody who is actually taking tangible steps in their life to, you know, move a cause forward.
Yeah, and I was going to say, one of the things that I loved working with you, Sean, because it was very clear that there were receipts to you know your ideals in your work, and I think that's true of all of the panelists, that, you know, we see evidence, whether that's in the teams that you have assembled, whether that's in who you choose to have around you in your leadership, you know, in your world, in who you're reading, what you're doing, what you're watching, where you're kind of hanging out. I think that's clear that there are more tangible ways of showing your allyship, and you know, that's why you're here. That's why we've got you on, because we really value that you are strong leading voices, advocating for this openness and this reflection, which is so needed. So thank you to all three of you. If we move forward, I'm going to ask the next question, which is wording that you know, Angelina and I are no strangers to controversy, and we often use wording in questions that you know, can be difficult. But we thought we'd come right out and ask you the feminism question. So you know, do you consider yourselves feminists? And I'll ask you the reason why we're asking it in this way afterwards. But let's leave it there. Who wants to take that one first?
I don't mind.
Go for it, Malcolm.
If that's all right with you, Sean. Do I consider myself a feminist? No, I can't put. And I need to qualify. I need to qualify really quickly as well. I don't think I can put because of my own positionality. And we've just been. This is where everyone starts backtracking and going, "Oh my gosh, he said no." Because of my own positionality, in terms of the words that have been committed to print by my family, I am an ally. I've got work to do. And so if I am going to say that I am a feminist, or that can't be a performative term that I use to sound good in a wonderful session like this, or a training session. It needs to be aligned, as I think everybody said, with that reflective work, which, yes, we're all on the journey of doing, but action, the doing. I don't see describing yourself as a feminist as a label that you attribute to yourself, in the same way that I don't believe being an ally is a label that aligns itself to performativity or in public spheres. It needs to be the doing, the action. I do a lot of stuff, but I'm gonna take that word out of my mouth.
Fair enough. No, absolutely fair enough. And thank you for being so honest. That's the first thing, that these conversations are never easy. And so the fact that we're uncomfortable asking it and then responding to it just shows us how loaded the word is. I've included a video in the link because I think it's also potentially generational, but I'm going to wait for Sean's response before I go into why I think that might be.
Thanks a lot. Malcolm, you said it all already. So I don't know if I have anything to add, honestly. I would say exactly the same thing. I think I'd like to be considered a feminist, if I could ever earn that recognition. I mean, I think back to I forget when it was exactly, maybe 10 years ago, the great talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie on, we should all be feminists. And that idea that I think she quotes the dictionary at one point. It just says, a feminist is a person who believes in the social and the political and the economic equality of the sexes. Yes, I do believe in what she's saying. More than that, I think, as Malcolm pointed out, it's all about whether or not that belief is translated into action for the cause. And that's something that I couldn't judge myself, but I would love to be considered a feminist, that's for sure.
So thank you, Sean. And I think the reason I'm going to say that I think perhaps it's generational is that I think there's a lot of ease that younger men have in using the terminology. And I'm wondering about why that might be. So I included this link to Noah Centineo, who's a a Netflix star in a couple of different shows, being asked in a UN Women Instagram Live by one of the young journalists, do you consider yourself a feminist? And of course, he's an actor. He could have reeled it off very easily in a very practiced way, but he just simply stated, if the dictionary definition is, I believe in equality, I believe that women should have the same access to everything that I have access to as a man, and I believe my role is to support women in my industry, in my networks, in my life, in my world, to have the same opportunities and to be paid for the same work, then yes, I am a feminist. And it rolled off his tongue pretty easily. So I'm wondering then if we have work to do within our leadership teams and within schools, because obviously, our generation is trying to bridge a gap with the ones that we're teaching. So if they find it easier than we do to talk about this terminology, maybe there's a midway point there. Maybe there's some understanding we need to reach, so that we can relay it in the terms that the students are using, that the young people are used to.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to add that it's also, not only the young people we're teaching, but the young adults who are coming to teach in our institutions. So Edith Johnson was one of them. She actually worked at another school here in Berlin, and she actually consequently left the profession because she felt that she couldn't make as big of an impact as she could by establishing her startup called Be Her Lead. And so now she works with teachers, training teachers to help empower young women. And on the Be Her Lead website, she wrote 2 blog posts about becoming why we need feminist schools. And so I've pulled out a quote from that here. So, she wrote that we need schools which identify as feminist institutions and a curriculum and education policy which embraces feminist values and goals as foundational and not an optional add-on. And I will share some links to those blog posts. But so she basically, proposes that instead of feminism in schools, she thinks that we need feminist schools. So schools which identify as feminist institutions, because if you actually believe in gender equity, then you should believe in this, because historically we have a disparity. So I'd like to maybe give you a chance to respond to that. What are your thoughts about schools becoming feminist schools? Sean, over to you.
Yeah, I read both of those blog posts. I think they're superb. I think one of the points that she mentions is the need to recognize that schools are in some sense places of social engineering, whether we like it or not. And I think we as educators, actually, we do like it in the sense that we're trying to do what we can to build a better world from one generation to the next. And I think just recognizing that, but then making sure that I think what resonates with me and what she's saying is that if we can take that recognition of the role of schools in building a better world, we can actually confront directly some of the inequities that, if not all of the inequities that our young people are facing. And clearly one of them is gender inequity. So I think it's not going to happen on its own. Schools need to very purposefully and deliberately, and I think using all of the resources at their disposal, really make an effort to empower women as students and women on the staff, but also I think as well help the young men who are among our student bodies, and also the male staff members understand what it is, on the one hand, to have the gender expectations perhaps that men do have, but also to understand the privileges that go along with being a man in our world today, so that we're able to actually make change. through many different ways, through curriculum, through leadership opportunities for women, through many, many different things.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, great points about that. And also on the work of, working also with men, and if we're talking about feminism and looking at femininity and masculinity. And so I think that's something that you've worked a lot with, Malcolm, with thinking about masculinity in boys in schools. Would you like to share something related to that, Malcolm?
Yeah, thank you. Sean made some great points. I think when I saw that quote, which I wholeheartedly embrace, I thought about the power of language in particular in relation to Kyra's question that caused my unsettling that you all saw, and the ways in which I guess language shifts. And so describing or identifying a feminist institution doesn't, for me, and I think for many, seem particularly provocative, controversial, or stressful. But actually, if we kind of broaden this out to discourses around transformation, because ultimately that's kind of what we're talking about. We want to transform school and education settings so they offer a equitable experience for everybody who's connected with it. Some of the discourses around, in the UK in particular, around decoloniality, around critical pedagogies, critical race theory, and so on and so forth, mean that the language that we use to engage in some of this work is perceived as being really, really problematic. Do we need to radically transform our curriculum, education policies to embrace different values? Yes. Do we need to disrupt the dominance of patriarchy, and in particular the perspectives of white men who are old? Completely. But that is a structural challenge as well as a challenge for us individually as practitioners. And I think it's really important as part of that openness and reflectiveness for us to be cognizant of it, which is tiring and exhausting, but absolutely vital to the work as Edith Johnson describes.
Thank you, Malcolm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, I've asked people to give their opinions in the chat and to disagree if they would like to. And one of our attendees has said that she, on a personal level, can't understand why we still, I will say, because I don't know your pronouns, sorry, why we still differentiate genders. I understand differentiating learning styles, backgrounds, ways of teaching, and so on. But at the end, we are all inside the same classroom going through the same experiences. Except for different teachers apart that can, I can't make out the last bit, but something about, except for being taught by a different teacher, what role should your gender play? And then we need to be the future generation's role models and think of the message we want to send them. So I would say, adding to what you've said, that's also about going inward and understanding that none of us understand the position of a student, for example, what they're going through within their own set of lenses, within their own experience of how they're living their education, just as we can't presume to understand your experience, Malcolm, as a Black man, or Sean's experience as a white man living in Asia, or Angeline's experience as an Asian woman living in Germany. Everybody's experiences are different. And so I think that openness, which you've talked about repeatedly, is so critical for us, just opening the gates to being able to say, maybe this is not what everybody else is experiencing right now. And therefore, if we can look at feminism just with its definition as a word that means equality, that means equalizing the playing field, we start to understand that the playing field is not equal to begin with. And therefore, we have work to do. So thank you. I think you've made the point really, really well. We have Corey's response as well to hear, and then I think we'll move on to the next question for you all. Maybe you can cue that up.
Let me play this. Yeah.
All right, first question. Do you consider yourself a feminist? I would have said, 5-10 years ago, I wouldn't really have used that term. I just didn't really want to co-opt a movement or anything. But I think living and working in rural South Africa with a student population that's 70% female, it does in some ways force your hand a little bit. You look at how much just raw potential and positive energy is sitting in these young women. And you realize, I mean, part of our job at Imagine Scholar is to break down barriers that allow, good kids who are working hard to be able to make a big positive impact in the world. And you realize that gender for a lot of our students is the main barrier that's getting in their way, and it's outdated ideas. And so I think that's, in some ways kind of made me take a look at things and say, like, I actually do have to take an active role. I do have to claim the identity of a feminist.
Interesting comments there. Now, I thought that Corey's response was really interesting, because it sounds like there's also a change and a shift happening in terms of the comfort or the usage of the word, and I think that's also something that we see reflected in the young people that we're around. Let's move on to the next question, because I know we're about halfway through and we want to get to lots of comments from the audience.
Yeah, so we want to ask you to, what alliances do you think communities like WomenEd need to make in order to close that educational career or leadership gap that that we showed you some of the statistics of earlier? So in like people talk about the glass ceiling, and then we talk about having actually it's the first rung of the ladder that is going. And then when you add in different intersectionalities of women as well, so there was some data that came out of the States where Black women who were deputy principals were staying in that role much longer than their white male counterparts before they moved into a more senior principalship role. And so and that's really been again and again, like Corey said, like this is a reality. This is what's happening with women, and that there is a gap in the disparity. So in order to narrow that gap, what would your advice be for us? Sean, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. Yeah, just recently my school went through a reaccreditation process, and really it occurred to me that often when accreditation teams come in, whether they're from the Council of International Schools or the Western Association of Schools and Colleges or the NEASC, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, regardless, I think, of which accrediting body comes in, they tend to be rather neutral on a number of matters that perhaps where there could be a stronger normative content, if that makes any sense. I feel like they're encouraging, I think, schools to be more committed to equity and inclusion. But I do feel like it would be extremely helpful if all of the accrediting bodies were to understand that maybe in certain areas, and particularly in this area, it would be good to have much more directive, maybe even prescriptive counsel to give schools to reach the kinds of equity and inclusion goals that they should have. And I think often do have, because that external push is something I think that would be extremely helpful for schools. So I don't know if that's exactly the right answer to your question, Angeline, because I'm not sure if WomenEd has had contact with these kinds of accrediting bodies, but I think it would be extremely helpful and beneficial to the international schools world if that were the case. I'm speaking about independent schools. Of course, public schools would be in a different case, but I think there the accrediting bodies would probably be local governmental authorities. Maybe the same kind of principle would apply. But that's what I would start there.
Yeah, yes, I think that's a really good point. So having specific standards or domains that address specifically the gender inequities that exist and how we are building gender equitable institutions. And I know that organizations like CIS and NEASC, I don't know about WASC, but they have intentionally put out revisions of things recently to try and address the anti-racism aspect. And so in response to the death of George Floyd in last May, that created a global awareness that all of the institutions have been doing that. And so I love how you're suggesting that the reaccreditation process is in itself a tool that can help guide that. And I think that the challenge for global institutions like that, though, is that that we work across cultures and across different nations with different laws, and they want it to be as inclusive as possible. But what I'm hearing is that, well, if we do believe and want to have equity, that we need to have maybe some measures. And so things like quotas, even like Germany brought in a quota for the amount of people who are on boards, but they made the quota like 33%, even though women are 50% of the population. And so, but at the same time, they're trying to bring in these measures. And I know that, yeah, so it's interesting to hear you say that from that kind of perspective of making it maybe a little bit more regulatory, perhaps, as well. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Malcolm?
It's a really interesting question, especially because, as kind of yourself and Sean have just highlighted, the women's ed community is international. So we're not talking about a particular geographic location or being able to compare geographic locations, because contexts are different from city to city, let alone country to country or place to place. However, I think there are some common threads that perhaps organizations like WomenEd can kind of pull on. So firstly, I'm a great believer in that 360 degree view of educational careers and leadership, and so looking intersectionally at the communities who are affected by educational career and leadership gaps as described within those different contexts, and arguably having a framework that enables to do that. In the UK in particular, academics such as Dr. Munir Abdi and Kaneta Hamperi and Professor Nicola Rollock and many others have done significant work in and around discourses in this space, and drawing upon the kind of academic community. I think there is a political response that needs to be perhaps a political relationship that has to be developed, and that could be through trade unions, it can be through schooling institutions and others, and I guess probably most importantly, what's happening in teacher education and development, as we're in spaces where Women's Ed is communicating with such a large community of educators, allies also. What are the messages that are being shared, transmitted, so that people who have got position, privilege, agency are making changes to ensure that within their institution, organization, educational career leadership gaps are removed? If you are the person who is in charge of the budget or makes the decision or the collection, it is in your power to do something about this today. Yes, there are implications, but you can do something about it literally today if you wanted to. So yeah, so there's a lot of alliances there. Thanks.
So not only the teachers who are coming towards us and making sure that they have the training in order to become advocates for this in their institutions they're going to enter into, but it sounds like the people who hold the purse strings are leaders also, and so we need a lot of leadership training. I would also propose, because I think sometimes that sadly for someone like Edith, who's making a really big difference, is, I mean, what's great is that she's now making an impact in many different schools, but at the same time in her own school, that can be frustrating if the leadership within a school is not someone who is also sharing these values as well.
Yeah, I wanted to mention some comments in the chat just very quickly, because I asked also what our attendees think is missing out, what we're missing out on doing or saying, because this question was also about, for our panelists, are we doing enough? Are we being loud enough? Are we making the right allegiances, the right allies? Or are we being, is the terminology we're using scary? Is it pushing people away from our cause? What can we do to make sure that this is being furthered? And I think your responses have just shown us that Yes, it needs to start top down, but obviously WomenEd as a grassroots movement wants to know where it can get into the cracks and where we can figure out how to make small changes happen if, as Angeline says, there's not buy-in at a senior level yet, although we know we're going in the right direction. So Emily was talking in the chat about working with NEASC for over 2 years as an LGBTQ representative to try and make their learning principles more inclusive, which is some fantastic work we have just here in the attendees. Bridget has talked about challenging ourselves to get into uncomfortable conversations again with our male colleagues, which is scary for us, and which is something that we know, we need support, and we need to be able to speak with more men as yourselves to understand the nuances of those conversations and where we might come up against resistance, but also where we can find ways to open up. So helping us understand what holds female aspiring leaders back, what males may not see or experience, and what we would suggest that male ally wannabes can do to help support aspiring female leaders. So those are all interesting conversations to be built into leadership discussions, but also for us to have kind of, around the water cooler at school. Somebody said this webinar is a great start and that counselling also can help us. Pauline has mentioned that schools' missions, visions and admissions policies. So this is more of that doing the work of getting the receipts, what's actually happening, reflect the commitment to being inclusive, and this should be the practice. So until it's there in the school's website, mission and vision, board meetings, then it's very unlikely that anything will take place that is going to be really effective change. So thank you to all of the panelists, and thank you to the attendees for adding your thoughts.
I know that Pauline and Bridget also both have been advocates for the hiring process of women in leadership and trying to increase the representation of women and providing opportunities and pathways to help support women who are aspiring to be leaders in international schools as well. So thank you so much for your work that you do there. But I'd also love to hear about perhaps how have you been an advocate for gender equity in your organization? Perhaps you could give us a practical example of something that maybe you've established within your school or within your work as well. So yeah, Sean, should we?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I guess first thing, I think most important thing for me has been actually just recognizing, I think I come back to the point that I made earlier on about my own privileges and my own implicit biases and any other of the many imperfections that I have, trying to move myself along that intercultural, I'm using the language of the IDI, the intercultural development continuum, sort of going from a monocultural white man's perspective to an intercultural mindset, where it's not just about accepting the differences that constitute the beauty of the world, but actually adapting myself to them. I think that's been incredibly important on my own learning journey. And then trying as much as I can to, I like the word that Malcolm used earlier on, just about of disturbing the status quo, I think, as much as possible. Just raising awareness among other men on staff around these kinds of questions has been incredibly important. And I think it's a work that never ends because, at least generationally, I go back to what Kyra was saying earlier on, there are many people in schools who have been raised a certain way, speak a certain gendered language, and with all the good intentions of the world may act in ways that fall short of the gender equity ambitions and hopes we all have. And I think it's just continuously supporting that raising of awareness is really important. I know it's not very concrete, but trying to do that as much as possible, I think, is really important. And then I think, you mentioned, Angeline, leadership, which is a complicated word in so many ways, but it's something that I think, whether it's for students in the classroom or for colleagues on staff, really needs to be tackled in a way that explicitly aims for greater gender equity. So that can be, speaks concretely about the ways in which we educate young women around, these are almost cliche examples, but forgive me, they're really important, especially in my school, around science and technology, engineering and math, that sort of a lot of the stereotypes that we often hear about the way in which young women react to or or evolve, I should say, over the course of their schooling are actually often true, in the sense that they can be extremely keen and enthusiastic around STEM-related subjects and careers when they're in elementary school, even early middle school, but then somehow, somewhere in there, whatever the year level it might be, but it's somewhere in adolescence, mostly I would argue because of the images they're receiving back from their peers, their male peers in particular, and often from their teachers, that they give them the sense that somehow that subject or that career is not for them. And I think that's something that needs to be tackled. It's an example of something that can be tackled explicitly. I think the teaching of at least in co-curricular terms, after-school activities in young women-only classes actually has been something that's been incredibly beneficial in my experience for helping young women realize that all careers are open to them, all interests can be pursued by them. There aren't specific tracks that they have to follow. So I think that's an example I would give of something very concrete about I used the word leadership earlier on, but it is about leadership understood as agency, about the chance that they have to actually lead their own lives, to go back to the Adichie quote that I had earlier on, or the reference that I had earlier on, to be their true selves and not be hindered by the stereotypes that we're foisting upon them. Sorry. Yep.
I love that, Sean. I'm getting excited and passionate listening to you, because it reminds me of work that Professor Ger Grouse, OBE, has done. He's director of Kidzania, which is basically a big giant playground for students to go in and explore careers and see what they'd like to do. And they work with students aged 4 to 14, because his research and that organization's research showed that those gendered career roles were imprinted as early as age 4. And so, you know, seeing it to being it is so important, and it's something that, you know, I think is absolutely an essential key part of this conversation. For me as a career advisor, that's really interesting and important for me. Thank you. And we'll go to Malcolm.
Yeah, Malcolm, would you like to respond to this question too?
Yeah, I mean, Sean made some just absolutely amazing and powerful points in terms of my own advocacy. I'm not going to reel out the CV, obviously. However, there are probably 3 things that come to mind immediately. One, which is kind of a, in terms of my own practice, I think you referred to it before, Angeline, around your kind of verbal cues that you're using within teaching environments, the gendered language that we can often fall into when we're in professional cultures. That's probably the non-verbal ways in which we present within our classroom, schools, spaces. There is a conversation about rugby, but all of a sudden it's just boys that are having that conversation, and you're facilitating that conversation and normalizing it because you are the person with agency in the space. It is about looking at your learning environment and environments and thinking about what's going on here, having that critical eye, as we've spoken about before. More recently, as I've kind of shifted out of classrooms and into being a talking head on stuff like this, there is some agency because I'm kind of not bound by some of the institutional boundaries that there are. But for example, I haven't in probably about 3 years, I think, been on any kind of speaking engagement where either the chairperson or my co-speakers are all men. I'm not going to do it. And in fact, I go further and say I kind of need to see a 50% ratio at least, and be intentional in terms of the work that I try to engage with. Not everybody is able to do that, but I think in many ways in our practice, we are able to advocate in discrete ways that don't necessarily draw the attention, challenge, surveillance, etc., that sometimes advocacy can bring. But we can be absolutely intentional about the work we do.
I love how you're setting your own expectations for panels, and so that's helping to create a pathway and opening up some doors and breaking down barriers that traditionally exist, whether they were subconsciously built or intentionally driven. And so, yeah, thank you for that, and sharing your many different ideas and different ways that are either lifting up women and the mindsets that exist in schools, but also some institutional ideas that could really maybe transform how things are working and being established. I hope we have time to hear from Corey as well. Should I play the?
We should. We're in the last 6 minutes, so I've asked in the chat for any burning questions to be written now so that we can start to wrap up. But yeah, let's hear from Corey last. I think he has some great points.
Okay.
Next question is some examples of supporting aspiring leaders in our school. So, I guess for us, we start working with students in 8th grade. So we actually are, working with our future staff, who are our alumni who come back through the whole cycle when they're, 13, 14 years old. So the first thing is we genuinely look at the issue of gender in a very authentic way. And I think we try to look at it in a nuanced way that understands what are some of the root causes, and, helping, young men look at, what are the insecurities and the angers and the things that are in some ways kind of the precursor to some of maybe the outdated gender ideas we look at. But once students are through the program and we're looking back at hiring, I mean, at this point, we only have female leaders who have come back. So our staff is, I think almost 60-70% female, but all of the alumni who have come back through the program are female. So in many ways, I think just the presence of some of the first alumni coming back. So any of our young women who are looking and saying, hey, working at Imagine Scholar, is there a place for female? I think, that's been the reality they've seen. And I think it's incredibly powerful for the young ladies, but I also think it's incredibly freeing and powerful for the young men to see these strong women who have come back, who are committed to their community. So I think it starts from baking it from the very beginning. And then it's also the precedent set by the alumni who have come back, who are in those leadership positions.
The good points about representation, I think, is something that you can see when you see it. You believe that you can do it as well. So thank you for sharing that, Corey, with us. Yeah, so International Women's Day is on the 8th of March. I'm proud that here in Berlin, it's actually our newest public holiday. It's been happening for the last couple of years now. And so the state of Berlin said, we want a public holiday to celebrate International Women's Day. And the campaign that they're having this year is to think about what do you choose to challenge and what is your pledge? So this pose of a picture, you could take a picture of yourself and post it as your pledge. So I'd like to kind of end and summarize while thinking about what will you choose to challenge to create a gender equitable educational institution. So what would your pledge be then? Malcolm, maybe we'll begin with you.
I wish I had some time to think about this. What would be my pledge to continue the work? And I think that's it. And I say that acknowledging and recognizing the difficult times that we're in. At these times, just to be able to continue proactively, intentionally in attempts to create gender equitable education institutions, the colonial education system, anti-racist social justice education system is hard work and takes a significant toll on those who are committed to engaging in it. So this year and this time, I pledge to continue.
Thank you for sharing. Sean?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think with the pandemic, it's been really easy, certainly it has at my school, to be just caught up in the day-to-day management of what is in effect a kind of prolonged crisis. And it's certainly that's been the case in the last 6 or 7 months here in Hong Kong. And I think just what I've done actually is a week in advance of the day, so yesterday, send an email to we're basically 19 members of an extended leadership team at the school, asking each one to identify what they think should be the most important challenge for our school to achieve a greater equity balance. And then we will be gathering together and taking stock of where we stand with this work and how we can keep going.
Great. I think, yeah, I mean, definitely a personal commitment, as you mentioned, Malcolm, to do the work that is hard work, and it is emotional and it's exhausting. And I think that, you know, having that commitment is really important. And then taking steps like the one you've just shared, Sean, in a real, you know, tangible, like, this is the action I'm actually going to take, and I've asked my leadership team to do that. So I really value what both of you have said into asking you forward. So maybe we'll need to follow back up in a year and see how you're going with your pledges as well. Yeah, but thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and thank you both of you who are here live. I know, you know, Corey couldn't be here for us to say it to him, but all three of you share something which is very important, and that's, you know, an ability to reflect and also to take time and take a step back. And I think that is most important right now in the pandemic, because we have been firefighting, as you've said, Sean, and we need leaders who can just sort of take a moment to reflect on what is the right course of action, and also how to care for their staff. So that kind of compassion comes through in speaking to both of you, and I think that's really, really key for us all to remember, just to be kind to ourselves and to each other as well.
Yeah, and I realize time quickly ticked away from us, and so
Yep.
I'd like to kind of wrap up with saying another quote from Edith is to say that you know, rather than skirting around issues like gender inequality, perhaps we need to embrace feminist values and think of the important tools to reshape not only our curriculum but our whole education system. I think what you said earlier, Sean, about how it's you know, schools as social engineering, and so that we're able to really make some, and Malcolm, you mentioned transformation, yeah, as well. And so I think that both of those things. So we've always end our heart to hearts with a few questions. So to think about, you know, as you move forward from this, are your actions going to promote gender equity or perpetuate inequity? And what is your part in upholding maybe a historically patriarchal institution, or are you part of building a more feminist institution in terms of the definitions that we've shared all in the chat about gender equitable places? And so what will you do is something we'd like you to reflect on as you move forward. And so we'd like to end by saying thank you so much. Thank you so much to both our panelists and also to Corey for sending us his reflections as well in the past. So thank you so much for your time, both Sean, Malcolm, and everyone else in the audience as well.
Yes, and we will be posting this for anyone who missed it and would like to watch it back. We'll be posting it, as I said, on all of those social networks, but we'll also make sure that we follow up, and hopefully we can have you back on another session to involve your voices and to hear a little bit more about your work in depth within another topic. So keep tuned into the series. We'll be posting the details of the next talk in a couple of weeks' time. So thank you for joining us.